Oh, there it goes. Okay. Hey guys, I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving break. Obviously, you notice I am not there with you today. It's because I had to be COVID tested Saturday morning. Um, I honestly think it will be negative because I've been having some allergies and a cough, and they gave me a steroid shot, and I feel so much better now. But you never know with this thing, so I can't come back to work until I get my results. And since it's a Sunday, I probably won't hear back until tomorrow, which means can't come to work. So I'm videoing obviously the first lesson, which this is what we would have been doing anyways. So I know it's not quite as fun doing this as a video version, but it just is what it is right now. Hopefully, I'll be back Tuesday and I can pass out your coat of arms activity, and I can show you guys examples of coats of arms that my students have done in the past that are amazing, and y'all can get excited about building your own. So, with that being said, Unit 5 is medieval Europe. And so the very first thing I want you to think about is, what comes to mind when you think of medieval times? That's your bell ringer, of course, for today. So make sure you answer that, please. And, most of your answers usually revolve around knights and tournaments and swordplay and jousting. And, you honestly, y'all all think about that restaurant, medieval times in Dallas, which actually I've never even been to. I would love to go to that place, but I've never even been there. Or you might think of Monty Python and the Holy Grail or the Crusades, since we just talked about them. The Knights Templar and all those things. But that's kind of the stuff that comes to mind, very chivalrous knights, maybe fighting for a lady's hand, or, you know, lots of chainmail. But and you're not wrong that that time frame and that era had a lot of that going on. So those are not the stereotypes usually exist for a reason, and so you're not wrong. So the deal is, though, is that you think of all of these lords and ladies and knights, and maybe, like, I know I've asked this question before and it cracked me up. I can't remember maybe who it was, but they said all I think about is mud. And I was like, well, that's true. Because like if you think about it, most of the time you think of medieval times, a lot of people kind of go to like England in their brain, and England's like a wet, cold, muddy place sometimes. So that's fair. But if you think about it, you're thinking in terms of a social hierarchy, even when you're thinking in terms of a stereotype. If you're looking at lords, ladies, knights, peasants, again, that's a social structure. Oh, I know. There's that pyramid. But the rise of feudalism is important to understand when you're talking about medieval Europe, because that's how those distinctions happen. That is the term for medieval European social hierarchy, is feudalism. And, how did they go from, being kind of tribal and, yes, having like kings and things like that, though, to this very distinct social pyramid? Well, a lot of it has to do with the Carolingian Empire falling apart. Okay, so we've talked about after Rome falls, all of that land gets taken back over by all of your, barbaric tribes. So your Ostrogoths and your Visigoths and your Vandals. But then Charlemagne, remember him from Unit 3, he comes in after his dad, Pepin, and really kind of creates a large kingdom, for the first time since Rome has fallen within continental Europe. And that gets named the Holy Roman Empire. Well, after Charlemagne's death, as it says in 814, his entire kingdom is split in three because he had brat sons that couldn't get along, is basically what it boils down to. And so you ended up with these three separate kingdoms. Well, there were some dudes to the north that we like to call Vikings that saw that the empire had been split apart and therefore was weaker. And of course, we've talked about this tons of times. If you see an empire in a weakened state, that leaves you vulnerable to attack. And that's exactly what the Vikings did. They started coming down from Scandinavia, so that's modern day Norway, Finland, and Sweden, and they started coming into continental Europe and attacking. Okay, now there's all different ways that Vikings kind of are referred to. They're referred as Norsemen, Northmen, the Vikings, the Normans. Sometimes they're even called the Normans because, we're going to talk about this here in a little bit. The French give them some land, actually, and they call it Normandy. We're going to land there on some beaches in the 1940s. But the Vikings are going to come down, and they're going to start destroying villages, wreaking havoc, setting fire to churches, because they are still very pagan. And so, they're burning stuff down and again, like just pillaging all over the place. And people are really, really scared. I mean, number one, Viking warriors weren't anything to mess around with. They were, big, burly, hairy men and were pagan still. And, again, very, very rough men. And so what they started to do was all of these local village people went to the wealthiest person in their area and asked for protection. It was like, oh my gosh, like we have nothing to protect us. We have no one to protect us. Would you please help us? Well, I mean, you can't, there's never anything, there's never no such thing as a free lunch, right? Like if you want something, well, then you have to give something up in return. And that's kind of how the feudal system got started. It was because the Vikings were coming down and all of these people were going to the wealthiest lords in their area. And he was like, well, if you want my protection and if you want my own personal bodyguards and military to, help protect this village and protect this land, then I need your loyalty and I need work from you. I need your sons and I need your grandsons to, swear an oath of loyalty to me. And I need them to be a part of this military venture against the Vikings. And so that is initially how that social pyramid gets started. It's because of the Vikings. So anyways, you've got Vikings coming down, and during the Viking Age and attacking. And again, the West Frankish kingdom is actually going to parlay with them, which means like negotiate, and give them land along the English Channel in exchange for them to stop terrorizing their kingdom. And again, that becomes known as Normandy. And then the Catholic Church is going to create a huge push to convert them to Christianity, because, I mean, if you can convert them to Christianity, then you have more control over them, not only as a church, but really as a continent, since most of the people in Europe at that time, other than the Vikings, had converted to Christianity. So it's kind of like, we need to assimilate them so they stop attacking us. So this next slide, if it will load. Uh-oh, is my internet being slow? Come on. Yep, go back. Well, you can kind of see now, even though it's in a different viewpoint, but the Vikings in a nutshell, y'all need to watch that right quick. It's pretty cute. And, because always remember, we would have watched the videos with me there. So watch the video. And then here we go on to the development of feudalism slide. Okay, So again, this is what I was leading up to in the last slide. So go back and watch that video, and I'm going to keep rolling on. Y'all go back and watch it, or pause me and watch it or something. So again, due to the threat the Vikings placed on people's safety, again, they turned to local wealthy landed aristocrats or nobles for protection. And this is how you ended up with feudalism. So here's the pyramid. You know, you always see for me, like I said, you know, we're always going to see a pyramid. Well, of course, no shocker, who's at the very, very top? The Pope. I mean, you know, he's the vicar of Christ, for goodness sake. So hello, it's going to be the Pope. Underneath him is, you know, are the monarchs, so your kings and queens, and then the nobility, and then your knights and vassals. These are those people that the lords were like, okay, if you want protection, that's fine. You have to swear loyalty to me and you have to serve in my military. And then a lot of times what would happen is these people would serve in the military, these vassals would serve underneath the Lord. And if he, you know, did really well in battle and proved himself to be very, very worthy, the Lord would actually grant that vassal land, which of course you guys all know land is like the most important thing that you could acquire. You know, land equaled, you should all be like in your heads saying power, of course. And so this kind of created that new, larger, expanding nobility in Europe. I mean, this is going to end up creating kind of that base of nobility in Europe that really hadn't been there prior to feudalism. And then you ended up with, of course, at the bottom, like your merchants, your farmers, your artisans, and then, of course, at the very bottom, your peasants. So, all right, vassals. Again, this is what I was talking about a minute ago. So vassals were responsible for the land appointed to them by their lord. Sometimes that might be the king, but most of the time it was like these local lords. And the land that they were given was called a fief. And they paid allegiance to their lord, of course, in exchange for not only military service, but also for this land. And they would usually, you know, build a nice home on it eventually. And you know, sometimes they would become knights even. It just depended on kind of how decorated they ended up being during battle. But, you know, knights, yes, started out as vassals, but not all vassals become knights. So, you know, just kind of FYI on that. So the knights, of course, are going to be the people, again, that really show themselves to be, you know, incredibly valiant and incredibly, you know, good at battle. And a lot of times they are going to be wealthy enough to own a horse, which owning a horse back then was, you know, a pretty big deal. Made you pretty hot stuff because they weren't the cheapest things to come across. And, you know, it gave them a large amount of social prestige to be a knight and to own a horse. And then it kind of created its own little like social section. You know, I mean, it was like you had your vassals and then you had like your knights. And of course, knighthood became hereditary, you know, just kind of like a lord, you know, his title would get transferred down to his son. Well, a knight's knighthood would also get transferred down, you know, to his son and heir. And so training started at age 7. Wonder where they got that age to start training. Anybody remember? I wish I was in class because somebody would be raising their hand right now and saying the Spartans. So, you know, again, they start training at age 7, and that way that, you know, they earned the right to inherit that title as a knight. And so, you know, it's a hereditary thing. So, there's that cough. You know, what is the feudal contract? Well, and again, it's this exchange for loyalty. You know, loyalty to one's lord is the chief virtue, and if I give you a parcel of land, then you have to show me that you are loyal to me and will fight for me. And you know, that was the long and the short of the feudal contract. Now, here's where it gets a little complicated. And I don't want y'all to get like too wrapped up in this because we're not going to talk about this a ton. But, sometimes students have a hard time. Like, there's like, okay, there's a lord. And then the lord gives the vassal land. Well, then the vassal, the new vassal that has land, can he give land to people? Yes, he can. And this is where, again, like if you look back at noble titles in Europe in the medieval era, like you'll cross your eyes if you start researching all of that because it gets super complex. But yes, like once a lord gave land to a vassal and there was that initial feudal contract, then that vassal could then create feudal contracts on his own and split his land apart, and people could then be loyal to him. This is how you end up with like dukes and viscounts and marquets and what are other like noble titles? There's all different types of noble titles other than just lord. And this is kind of how it gets started in a lot of ways. Is like you have your initial guy and then you've got all of these branched out behind him and underneath him, and it can get complicated, but again, we're not going to get into it that much. So what does fealty mean? I mean, guys, it just means loyalty. If I swear my fealty to you, that's loyalty. Again, the major obligation was to provide military service. You provided at least 40 days out of the year, but most of the time they were having to provide way more than that, especially during the Crusades when all of these lords were sending, their vassals to the Holy Land trying to retake it, and this is also the reason why a whole bunch of these lords go bankrupt. We talked about that at the end of the little Crusades mini unit. But the lord vassal relationship, of course, is all about honor and loyalty, and it is between free men. A lot of times students are like, so does that make the vassal like a slave? No, because he's entering into this contract as a free man. I mean, he's saying this is what I want, and he's getting something in exchange for his service. So again, it's a contract. It's not he is not enslaved to the lord or anything. And here we go. Here's like Earl. That was one of the ones I was missing. Earl, Duke, Marquis, Viscount. Of course, your Prince. I can't remember what's underneath my head or behind my head. But anyways, European feudal society is going to be dominated by men whose chief concern is warfare. Hello, Crusades. And, you're going to have all of this new social hierarchy emerge with lords creating vassals, vassals then creating vassals. And, this is how you have your hierarchy, spring up, and those beautiful stereotypes that we always think of that I asked you about at the very beginning of the lesson come into our brains. So what did knights do? And what, if they weren't warring, if they weren't going off to the Holy Land to try to get Jerusalem back, what did they do in their spare time? Well, this is how tournaments got started. They started holding tournaments to keep, hone their skills and keep them ready for battle if and when it came. And so the code of chivalry was created amongst knights. And this is kind of a little example of the code of chivalry. It was fair play. Of course, you had to be noble, valor, honor, courtesy, and loyalty. Those are kind of your main things that revolve around the code of chivalry. Some of the cool things in here: never charge an unhorsed opponent, avoid cheating, avoid torture. Yeah, it's always good. Exhibit self-discipline, respect women, protect the innocent, obey the law, exhibit courage in word and deed, respect life, avoid deception, always keep one's word, exhibit manners, be respectful of host authority and women, be polite and attentive. So I mean, very, again, chivalrous. I don't believe that chivalry is dead. Now it's a saying, chivalry is dead, and I don't necessarily believe that. But anyways, yeah, it was just this code of honor amongst knights, about how they were going to treat the world around them. And So women could hold property during feudal Europe and had an opportunity to play pretty important roles at court because if you think about it, the men oftentimes were away at war. So it was really the women, holding down the home front. A lot of these ladies uh, should get a large amount of credit for keeping up these, castles and manor houses and things because their men largely were gone. Either crusading in the Holy Land or fighting. If you were English, you're fighting the French all the time. Or you were fighting against Viking hordes or whatever else. And so, it was really up to the women back home to keep keep everything running. So this is a clip from A Knight's Tale. And Edward, the Black Prince of Wales, was actually a real historical person. Now, this movie is not historically accurate at all, but it's fun to watch, as I wrote there on the bottom. And so it's just kind of a fun little clip of maybe a movie that you wouldn't mind watching. I actually have pictures. I think I have them in this slideshow. I've been to Canterbury, where Edward, the Black Prince of Wales, is entombed, and it has his medieval armor on display and stuff, and I have pictures of it. So I'll show you that as we move along a little later in the unit. But that is the first lesson for this unit. I'm not going to get into lesson 2. Hopefully I will be there in person to teach you that on Tuesday. But anyways, that's it for today. I will keep you guys posted on my test results. And again, hopefully see you on Tuesday. That is it for today, though. Bye. Y'all be good for the sub. You always are. But just telling you again.